it's Michelle again, and this week we're going to start talking about faunal analysis. And faunal analysis is animal bone analysis or animal remains analysis. So we're talking about shell, we talk about bone. In some places you can talk about some soft tissue stuff that gets mummified, but that's not something that we find in Northeast Arkansas. But other places that is something that is encompassed in faunal analysis. And I mean, we'll start off, we get really excited if we find bone tools. And we do have a couple from Parkin and from other sites locally, and I'll show you those. So we've got this fish hook made out of bone. You can see it's pointed right there. And then it does have a little indent on this top edge here where you could tie some string to attach it. And then we have another tool here called an awl, and it's just this pointed tool, and it's made out of bone. And kind of like the lithic tools that we talked about a couple weeks ago, it's really polished at this end, so it's nice and pointed, and it's been polished up a little bit, either from use or someone might have actually polished it up, and then the other end of it is broken. And so those are kind of neat, but they stand out because we don't find a lot of tools, but it is important to remember that animal bone is really hard and it's a really tough material. And so it's hard to work into a tool, but once you do, it's a really solid thing to be able to use. If you made a bone tool fish hook, that's a solid piece of material. It would be a good tool for a long time. And same with an awl. If you're trying to like puncture something, that's going to be a solid tool for you to use. It won't break very easily. It'll last you for a long time. It's a useful thing. And one other thing I have, it's not a tool, but it's a decorative element, and it's a button. Let's see it. And it's made of shell. And so it's pretty delicate, but there's definitely shell buttons were produced throughout history, into the historic period too. People for a long time used shell to make buttons. It's pretty, it's real shiny, and it makes a solid button for your clothes. So that's one way that people utilize shell that you don't really think about so much. But like I said, these are kind of rare examples, stuff we don't find a lot because it's smaller, it breaks easier, and there was less of it around. You wouldn't probably leave this in a trash pit if it was still functional. So what we usually find is just these kinds of little small pieces of bone or shell that are in kind of good condition. They're still solid, but they're just little pieces. So there's a piece of a long bone, but it's just the middle of a piece. There's not a whole lot to say about it. And so what we can do though is, even despite it being small pieces that there's not a lot to see, we always try to have reference collections, which means animal bones that we know what animal they came from. And then we can check these pieces of bone against those known bones and figure out what species of animal these pieces of bone came from. And when we do that, then we can start talking about what animals people were eating in the past, and sometimes what animals were just living around the village in the past that maybe people weren't eating. So things like mice and snakes, sometimes you find those, and sometimes we can't tell if someone ate them or if they just fell in a trash pit and they were trying to scavenge some stuff and maybe couldn't make it back out again. But we can start to tell what kind of animals were in the area, what kind of things people were eating, what kind of animals people were hunting, and from that kind of information, what animals were around, we can start to interpret what kind of environment was around in a larger picture. So if we're finding tons and tons of fish and turtles and amphibians, that might indicate that it was a wet kind of area. That people there had access to a lake or a river. And if there are migratory birds, then that might tell us that they were in a flyway. A couple times a year they'd see all these birds come through. Whereas if we're finding a lot of animals that live in a wooded area, we might make the interpretation that people that in the past, that area was very wooded, and that's the kind of animals that people were interacting with because that's where they were living, and that's the type of environment that was around. So it's really cool how we can go from this little piece of bone and then this whole collection of bones and the bones from all of the other FSNs from a site, and start to really talk about what the environment looked like. I mean, that seems like a huge leap when you start, but it's actually something that is really cool that faunal analysis allows us to talk about in archaeology that lithics and ceramics don't necessarily give us. And so next week I'll show you a little bit of my reference collection and show you how we start to make some of the interpretations of what species these little bits of bone come from. And we'll go from there. So I hope this was interesting, and we'll pick up again next week. Talk to you then.